Well, thank you so much. Thank you so much for your service for our freedoms, which we can enjoy today. And thank you for just bringing the very human history, the such important human history that we must cherish, and that we now increasingly through your and others' endeavours can bring to life and to light. And it is incumbent on us all to be able to pass it on to future generations. And that's a key aspect of what we want to do through the museum at Trent Park. Thank you so much. I'd now like to, call upon a great privilege and pleasure actually, to invite Mr. Iain Standen, the Chief Executive of Bletchley Park, the World War II Code-Breaking Centre that gives us a great example of how we can cherish our such important history and heritage for future generations. Iain.
There we go. Ladies and gentlemen, good evening. It's a great pleasure to be here this evening to talk to you. Can I just ask, who's been to Bletchley Park? Fantastic. So I won't need to go too much in detail about what Bletchley Park is all about. Next slide, please. As those of you who've been will know, it's about code-breaking the Second World War. It was the home of the government code and cipher school, which attacked enemy codes and ciphers, deciphered them and produced, as Helen has already highlighted, war-winning intelligence. Next slide, please. And it was manned by a lot of people. Started with a couple of hundred folks at the start of the war. By the end of the war, there were just under 10,000 people working in Bletchley Park. It went from being a code-breaking cottage industry to an industrial code-breaking factory. Pictures here show you some of the folks, and if you look at it, you'll spot that there's a lot of ladies there. 3/4 of the population at its height was female, a quarter male. A great place to be a young man, particularly as the average age is about 25. But they all served, as Fritz did, and our job today is to commemorate and tell and educate the public about their service, about the job they did. I'm going to talk a little bit about how we're doing that and how we're taking it from what was a derelict post-war site into the vibrant heritage attraction it is today. Next slide, please. So this is an aerial view of Bletchley Park, July 1940, taken by the Royal Air Force, flying over in a Spitfire. It looks very much like a typical country house, because that's what it was. It was a country house taken up at the start of the war. And right in the centre, you might be able to spot there's a few wooden huts just starting to appear around the mansion. At this point, a couple of hundred people working. As the war progressed, next slide please, it grew up. I'm afraid I haven't got a large number of World War II photographs because, as you might imagine, in a top-secret site, cameras weren't terribly well welcomed. But at the end of the war, this was a photograph taken actually probably illegally by one of the folks there from the top floor of the mansion, looking out over what was now a 56-acre site, covered with buildings to host these 10,000 people. They worked 8-hour shifts, 3 shifts a day. Any one time, there's about 3,000 people on site. As I said, average age about 25, lots of young ladies. The place very much had the feel of a university campus. At the end of the war, when the war was successfully completed, some of these folks went off to form the new GCHQ, initially in North London and eventually down to Cheltenham. A lot of the people went back to normal lives, for very many of them ordinary lives, and having been told on the pain of death that they'd signed the Official Secrets Act, they kept their silence for 30 plus years. The site itself went, a bit like Trent Park, into government ownership. It was used variously as a teacher training college. The GPO had a training establishment there, various other bits and pieces. And it was knocked about, abused, because nobody really knew the value of the place. Again, very much echoing what's happened to Trent Park. Next slide, please. This is one of the few photographs that was taken. At the end of the war, they did capture about 200 shots of various people in their workplaces. And they're the only real reference we have as a heritage attraction, as a trust, keeping this place, of what it was really like in them. And so they're very treasured pictures for us. And I show you that one there because I'll show you what we've done later on in just a moment. Next slide, please. So after the war, the buildings went into rack and ruin. This picture was taken probably about 5 or 6 years ago of one of our wartime huts. Now, these aren't terribly important architectural buildings. They are built much as you build a garden shed, a brick footing and a prefabricated hut. But they are listed buildings, not because they're architectural importance, because of what went on inside them. What went on inside them was war-winning intelligence production, and that's why we preserved them. Next slide, please. As you can see, 5 or 6 years ago, they were getting pretty ropey. Next one. This is one of the brick buildings. As the place expanded from 1941 onwards, they replaced wooden huts with brick and steel buildings like this one. Again, this was taken about 6 years ago. Overgrown, trees growing through the roof. Next slide. Inside, with what looks like a Stasi interrogation cell, water dripping down the walls, post-war infill walls, which caused intrusions into the roof and caused the water to seep through. They were a pretty sorry state. Next slide, please. But we were very lucky. We managed to get some funding support from the Heritage Lottery and other people to match fund, corporate sponsors like Google, government sponsors like the Foreign Office, which allowed us to transform the site, take these buildings and put them back into use so you could tell the story of what went on during the war. Next slide, please. So we stripped back the huts, took them apart a bit like an Airfix model. Where possible, we used the building material that was already in the huts. Where not, we sourced wartime planking from some huts that were being taken down somewhere else. Next slide, please. And we transformed the inside of them. We've set-dressed them. We've used audio-visual techniques. There's a sort of projection on the wall there. There's a soundscape goes on. And as you walk through the huts, and I hope some of you who have been have seen them, you get the feeling what it was like to be inside these huts, working in what were rudimentary conditions. As I said, pretty much like a garden shed. People inside these sheds were doing very, very difficult cerebral work in terms of breaking codes and producing intelligence. Next slide, please. Inside that brick and steel building I showed you, we turned it into our visitor centre. We took out all the infill walls. This is halfway through the process. Next slide. The same view today with a purpose-built fit to provide a visitor centre that gives an overview when people arrive. Very important with complex stories like Bletchley Park, like Trent Park. When you arrive at a place, you need to be orientated. You need to understand where this story fits in the Second World War, what was going on here, before you go and explore the physical place itself. Next slide, please. And hopefully you'll see that, and this is another one of those photographs taken at the end of the war, that the finish we've now got inside echoes very much what it was like during the war. Next slide, please. Outside, we also transformed the outside of the place. This was taken again about 5 years ago. Some of the huts looking very dilapidated with tarpaulins on them. A tennis court being used as a car park. Next slide, please. We've now taken that back. The huts have been transformed. The blast walls, the brick walls you see, were put outside there to take them back to as they were in 1940-41, where there was still an air threat from the Luftwaffe. So these walls are built outside to stop the fragments and bombs damaging the huts. We've restored grass on the tennis courts and again made the ambience of the place much better, both echoing how it was in the war, but also providing important amenity for our visitors. Next slide. So, what are the key requirements of a successful heritage attraction? I summarise it as 4 things there. First of all, place. Bletchley Park has place. You can go and stand there. You can stand in the office that Alan Turing occupied. You can feel the hairs in the back of your neck as you realise that he walked on those floorboards. You can do the same over here in Trent Park. You can go to a place where people actually did war-winning work during the Second World War. People like Fritz here. Secondly, you need a narrative. Well, Helen's told you the narrative, told you the story. Fritz has amplified it beautifully. You have a fantastic story here that people need to know. And, as Helen highlighted, the story is much less well known at the moment than the Bletchley Park story, so you can build on that. As a museum, you need practical things like facilities. Again, Helen highlighted catering. You need catering, you need a visitor centre, you need a shop, all those things. So people, when they come, and they expect it these days, have all those things to make their visit good. And of course, you need some good media coverage. Well, you're starting to build that. We've been very lucky. Next slide. We had this young lady visit us, which of course is very helpful. And I will do a slight aside to that. You couldn't write this story. I'm sure some of you heard it. we wanted a high-profile VIP to open our newly delivered exhibitions and transformation of the site. We thought she might be a good lady to come and open the place. And as we started to research, we found out actually that her grandmother and her great-aunt both worked at Bletchley Park during the Second World War. How fantastic was that? So you couldn't write that stuff. Next slide, please. And the icing on the cake was on the day we were able to sit her down in an office in the hut where her grandmother and great-aunt were both sat on the day that the announcement the Japanese were going to surrender came in the early hours of the morning, with this lady, Lady Marion Body, who was on shift at the same time as them. So some things just happen by luck and you can't preordain them, but it was actually fantastic in terms of making the launch a real event both for her and for us. Next slide. And of course, we were able to bring in lots of people from the local area, local school children and what have you. And school children who, again, I think it was Jason alluded to, a very important part of museums going forward. Education programs are very, very important as part of what you do. Now, of course, we educate the public all the time. Our 250,000 visitors are all getting an education experience. They're coming to be educated informally and sometimes surreptitiously. They don't realise they're getting it. But also, you have a formal education programme as part of what you do. So we'll have contact with about 18,000 kids on site this year, about another 5,000 in an outreach programme. But it's very important in terms of passing on these fantastic stories and this important heritage to them. Next slide, please. So I'll leave you with 3 top tips, really. Have ambition and think strategically. What I mean is be ambitious about this project. It's a great project. It can be delivered. And be ambitious about what you're trying to look for. Think strategically. Make sure that you have things in place in the future so that what you're doing now has an enduring quality to it and you're not caught out downstream with not having the right facilities and what have you to do the job. Secondly, have confidence in the story. It's unique, it's engaging, it is an engaging story, it is unique. That means people will come from far and wide to visit it. And, crikey, you're on the end of a tube line, so people coming out of London, it's a great place to be. And I say that somebody who's got a mainline station 5 minutes away, but trying to get people on the train is difficult. On the tube, it's much, much easier. And have belief. If you have belief in this, these people have got the passion, they've got the belief, they've done the work. I think it can be delivered, and you'll have a great, great museum at the end of it. Thank you very much.